Okay, let's get right into it. We're talking about an absolutely wild 48 hours, where a single Supreme Court decision triggered a presidential move that sent a massive shockwave through global commerce. This is the story of a huge legal showdown and the chaotic trade policy that came out of it.
And it all kicked off with this, a bombshell announcement on a Saturday. Just one day after he introduced a brand new 10% global tariff, the president cranked it up by 50%. You can just imagine the uncertainty this threw international markets into.
So how did we get here so fast? I mean, a court ruling on Friday and a massive global tariff on Saturday? To really get what happened, we need to rewind the clock by just 24 hours to the verdict that changed everything.
Right. So the whole story starts at the Supreme Court. A decision that came down on Friday morning is what set this entire chain of events in motion. And this wasn't just any ruling. It was a major constitutional showdown over the power to tax.
You see, through 2025, President Trump had been using this act, the IEEPA, as his main tool for imposing these really broad tariffs. He declared national emergencies over things like trade deficits or drug trafficking, and that was the justification for these new taxes on imports.
The case, which was Learning Resources, Inc. v. Trump, really boiled down to this one fundamental disagreement. On one side, the majority said, look, the Constitution is crystal clear. The power of the purse, the power to tax, belongs to Congress, period. But the dissent shot back, saying, hold on, tariffs are a classic way to regulate trade, and that falls right under the president's emergency powers. And wow, the way the Chief Justice framed the court's 6-3 decision was pretty striking. He basically said you can't hang this enormous, multi-billion-dollar power on just two little words buried in a statute. So, in the end, the court struck down the IEEPA tariffs, calling them a huge overreach of executive power. So, you might think that's the end of it, right? The president's main tool for tariffs is now illegal. But nope, he didn't retreat. Instead, he pivoted, incredibly fast, to a different, much older law. The speed here was just breathtaking. Think about it. Friday morning, the old tariffs are dead. By Friday evening, a whole new 10% tariff is announced. And then by Saturday, it's already jacked up to 15%. A true whirlwind.
So the administration's new weapon of choice was this thing called Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. It's a provision that's hardly ever used, and it has some very specific rules. It lets the president slap on a temporary tariff for what are called balance of payment reasons, but, and this part is absolutely key, it comes with a 150-day expiration date.
As you can probably guess, this super fast and dramatic policy change sent huge shockwaves of confusion and uncertainty through the global economy. We're talking about massive disruptions to supply chains all over the world. And get this number, $142 billion. That's about how much money was collected from the IEEPA tariffs that the Supreme Court just said were illegal. Suddenly, there's this massive, complicated fight over who gets that money back. It created a total logistical and financial nightmare for the government and for thousands of businesses. But you know, this wasn't just about the money. It was about predictability. Global trade runs on planning, on knowing what the rules are gonna be. This kind of policy whiplash creates what economists call radical uncertainty, and it makes it almost impossible for businesses to plan ahead. So to see how these shockwaves actually played out on the ground, let's zoom in on one country that was in a really unique spot: India. The trade relationship between the U.S. and India was already a bit of a roller coaster, and this just sent it on another wild loop. I mean, talk about whiplash. India had just navigated its way out of a punishing 50% tariff. They worked out a new trade deal, brought their effective rate down to 18%, and then, just weeks later, this new 15% global levy gets slapped on top of everything, throwing that brand new agreement right into chaos. For India's major export industries, each one faced a different kind of challenge. The booming IT sector, suddenly hit with higher costs. Pharma companies, they had to figure out this complex web of exemptions. And the huge textiles industry was basically forced to absorb the full blow. It sent businesses absolutely scrambling to adapt. Now here's the part that's kind of counterintuitive. Even though the new global tariff is 15%, which sounds lower, because of how it interacts with all the other existing duties, India's effective tariff rate, what businesses actually pay, is now projected to go up a little bit from 18 to 18.5%. So, what does this all mean, and what should we be watching for next? Well, the most important thing to remember here is that this whole new trade reality, it's built on a ticking clock. Remember that number, 150 days. That new 15% global tariff has a built-in expiration date. If Congress doesn't approve it, it just vanishes in about 5 months, and that sets the stage for some really intense political maneuvering.
This 150-day window basically forces everyone, we're talking corporations, foreign governments, you name it, into this period of intense lobbying and negotiation. And it leaves all these critical questions just hanging in the air. This isn't the end of the story at all. It's really the start of a new and very uncertain chapter.
And that really brings us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? What started as a legal fight over presidential power has ballooned into a high-stakes test for the entire global trading system. Now, businesses and governments all over the world are trying to figure out, is this the beginning of a new, more confrontational era? Or is it just a temporary shock before things go back to normal? The only certainty right now is more uncertainty.